All
Hi.
right.
Yeah,
Hi.
I guess we're doing it. This is totally our first run at it.
I know.
100%.
I'm very excited.
Yeah.
We have a graphic for the cover now,
Wow.
which which shows your face.
Yeah. The important one, like, not the good-looking one. Like, we got to make sure, like, hey, this is still like a nerd podcast. You got to like show like this stereotype ugly nerd, like, look at this skinny fuck. Yeah.
Right. I got to the photo shoot and he was like, "Shit, you're wearing makeup?"
It's like, oh, you look good. No, this is unreal. And by photo shoot, you mean like we got out of an escape room.
Yeah. Okay, so the clip like poster thing, thumbnail image. I know technology and I am a nerd, I promise.
Hmm.
Um it's a photo from us holding up a just escaped thing because I think I've done like 50 escape rooms at this point, 50 plus.
Yeah, it's more than
And,
me.
and
Like, way more
I know
than me.
you've done it. To be fair, I used to live in LA and I was really lucky and I was friends with someone who worked at one of the big escape room companies there and she got me in for a bunch of the beta rooms. So I used to do escape rooms like all the time for free. It was freaking amazing. Um, but that one was really fun. I liked it a lot. That company does a lot of like one room escape rooms that are like hand painted and stuff and they have interesting puzzles.
Oh,
What's the
are you
name of the
talking about the one
company
we
again?
did?
The fishbowl.
Okay, yeah.
It was clearly a Finding Nemo knockoff, but in a very fun way.
Yeah.
What's the name of the company? We should plug them for the with three people who watch this.
It'll be like you, me, and your dog
My
Oberon.
mom, probably.
Oh. um. Oh man, I've already like sworn like 4 times. Uh.
Okay, well,
Oh,
I
the
think
name.
there's a button you can pick when you upload that says this isn't child appropriate.
Okay. Well, dang, that's unfortunate. Well, then I guess it's gonna be 2 viewers because it's just gonna be you and your mom watching.
Are you not
Um.
going to watch it?
Well, yeah. Well, it's not child appropriate, so.
You're
Uh.
calling yourself a child?
Yeah. 100%. Um.
Oh, okay.
But the name of the escape room, the company is Bond's Escape Room. They have 2 locations up by the DC area. Man, way to just get me to dox myself immediately. Also, uh, we're getting sidetracked, which is, I guess
Oh,
the
right.
theme of our podcast that we're
Yes.
doing.
This is a D&D podcast, by the
This
way, for
is,
anyone who is wondering.
yeah. This is just a side quest podcast. My name is John,
I'm Maria.
and well, I haven't DM'd in a little bit, but a hot minute now. But we both
To be
have
fair,
several years
you
of
you came from
XP.
6 years of DMing 12-hour games, so I think you've put in the hours there.
We haven't done 12-hour sessions like since around COVID, which makes sense. But at some point we got to grow up. Not me though. I'm still a child.
Hmm.
Um,
Understood.
but yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about why or how we came up with the podcast name before we get into things?
Yeah, well, if I recall, I threw out some names, and then you said it should be called Just a Side Quest, and then you explained to me why it should be called that, and then we named the podcast that. So, would you like to explain it?
Okay. I mean, yeah, I guess I could do that if you want me to. But yeah, just a side quest. It's one of those things where like, not just in tabletop RPGs, but also in video
D&D.
games. You know how you like, oh, you're on main quest. It's like, oh, it's just a side quest. I could do this really fast, and all of a sudden, like you're
Hmm.
17 side quests in, you're like 500 miles away from whatever like objective you're supposed to be on. It's like, oh wait, that's right, the world was gonna end, and now I'm halfway across where I need to be. Uh, yeah. Unfortunately, our conversations are also like that, or fortunately, like we have a lot to talk about all the time,
Yeah,
and
I think we have a
so
lot of fun.
yeah, we just get sidetracked all the time. Just a side quest.
Yeah. And I will say, from what you've told me about your game, which you still have yet to tell me the entire plot of, I think that's kind of how your players play in your game, which is very sandboxy. And it sounds like they have a really good time. But there's a lot of unfinished quests and side quests that they have going on that have kind of veered them in different directions in the campaign.
Yeah, in my player's defense, like they do have like I run a very sandbox campaign, which is what I like in general as a player, and
Right. And that's Homebrew 5e, right?
yeah, that's over 5. I got started. at 3.5 for a little bit, and then I did a little bit of 4E, fell off of it, and came back for 5th edition when I
Hmm.
was watching like this podcast. Um, it was like role play, and I was like, oh my god, like these guys are. It's like when you watch a horror movie. Like this is like my segue into anyone who hasn't played a tabletop RPG of like you're watching like a horror movie and you're just like, why would you do this? This is so dumb. Like, what would you do in a scenario instead? And like I feel like that's like the best intro for anyone who's like even passingly interested in D&D. It's just like throw them into like a hypothetical scenario.
Yeah, I actually saw this video. I'm forgetting her name, but she's the romantic interest in Daredevil, and she's in a couple other acting things. I know she's in True Blood. Do you know who I'm talking about? The blonde actress?
Nope.
Okay, well, I know she's really into D&D and D, and she talks
Okay.
about it a fair amount. And I saw an interview with her on a different podcast, and he was asking what D&D was, and she told him like let's just play it, and then she like laid out a scenario and then started asking him what he'd do, and then as like things came up, she kind of explained how roles worked. And I
I
thought that
saw
was a
the
very
same
succinct
video.
way to do it.
Yeah, it was a really
Yeah.
good video. It's just like without any roles, just like, hey, remember this is bare basic bitch. Like, uh,
Mhm.
sorry, mom. Um, I'm
Okay,
gonna
I'm
keep
gonna look up
swearing.
her name because it was a great video. People should watch it.
Okay. But yeah. Um, I guess that's. I guess we probably should have like given our qualifications before like jumping into things too. Man, we're just kind of all over the place. What do you know?
Wait. I found her name. Her name is Deborah Ann Wool. Woll.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Uh,
then she does a lot with D&D community.
yeah. I was just talking to fill in the empty space where you look stuff up. So
Okay.
you're
You
welcome.
type very fast. It doesn't take long.
Well, yeah, even so. Um, but yeah. I guess like qualifications, like I've played D&D for several years. I don't know how many years now. I've DM'd for about 6 years now or so. Six. What is this? 2024. So 6 or 7 years now. Time's weird. After COVID, everything got weird. Um. Uh. Done like a hand. Like I don't. I think I've only finished like 2 campaigns, maybe. All the others tend to fall apart for scheduling issues. Um.
Hmm.
But yeah. What about you?
Yeah. Well, I played a little bit of 3.5 in high school, but again, I got back into it with 5e. Started making some geeky friends about 6 years ago, maybe seven. Um, and started a 4-year campaign, and then pretty shortly after that, I started DMing a home game. And then that was a 2.5-year campaign. That was really fun. We finished during COVID because everyone was unemployed for a hot second, so we were doing like 2 or 3 sessions a week and just kind of marathoned through it. But unfortunately, I lost my job because of COVID, and I was kind of scrabbling for income. And I love DMing. I love making my own maps and my worlds and homebrew stuff. So, Start Playing Games was created in 2020, and that's a pay per seat online TTRPG just platform where you can like find any TTRPG online and pay for a seat in a game. So I started DMing through that. Now I run 3 weekly games, and it's a part-time job for me. I've yeah run some one shots, but mainly I do like long-term homebrew 5e campaigns.
Yeah. I think that'd be a very interesting topic to like jump into. I know that the hot topic right now everyone wants to talk about is, oh my god, all the changes to D&D 1, and I don't really necessarily want to get into that like for this right now.
Yeah, I'd
Obviously,
also like to read the new player's handbook and everything
yes.
because so far I did get an early access copy, I think, but I can't access it until September 3rd. So I don't want to talk about it until I've actually read it because right now I'm just watching the Dungeon Dudes, who are another their YouTube channel, and they're doing a fantastic recap job of like going over all of the class changes and stuff. And I think Ginny D is also talking about it some. But everything I know is just kind of through that and through just random things I'm reading online.
Yeah. Um, I don't want to formulate too many like hard opinions. Like I have some of them, but
Mhm.
again, like I
You
haven't
you
actually.
definitely have
Oh,
some vehement, very very hard opinions.
that's just about things in general. That's just who I am. That's part of my personality. Okay.
I think you're one of the two. You're either, it's incredibly important and you need to have, like ride or die opinions on it, or you don't care. And there's not much in between.
It's either a mountain or it's flat plains. That's it. There are no molehills here, and I'll die on every single mountain.
But there's a lot of rabbit holes.
A lot of rabbit holes. That's why I don't get to the mountains. Um, but yeah, we will talk about that more, like maybe episode 2 or some shit. I don't fucking know. But as
Hmm.
far as this goes, I did want to like jump into like how different things are between like, because you DM as a paid DM, I DM for funsies,
Hmm.
and uh, just like how that kind of shapes and molds like the groups that we individually have. Because I feel like for me, because it's like a for funsies game, I do this for fun. I do this out of love and passion, and I can be hyper discriminatory against who joins my games because fuck you. If it's not a good fit, get just like it's not a good fit. Like why would you waste your time? I don't want to waste my time or my players' times. So let's not play this game, right?
I think it also really depends on. I think the two of us have very different personalities and very different ways of approaching conflict. And if you were a paid DM, I think you would run an incredibly different table from what I probably would, be more comfortable running. Um, that said, I think too, if people are paying like $25, $30 to play for a 3 hour game, which is generally what I charge, they're going to be more committed to it. They're going to be either they're incredibly into D&D and they want a really curated experience that's very, like story and RP focused, or whatever the DM is advertising. On my profile, I advertise that I'm very story and RP focused. And they want a group of friends or a group of people to play with that exemplify that, which is very difficult to find. It's hard finding a good group that all want to play in the same way. Or they don't have friends to play with because they're terrible to play with. And you can figure out who's who pretty quickly. But fortunately, I do a lot of screening. I used to not screen at all, and I've learned through trial and error that I really need to screen a lot more. So I think I do a lot of screening, but you do a lot of screening too. So I think it kind of depends. So far, I haven't let any psychos in since I started my screening process. I do a lot of messaging beforehand. There are some people that want to join day of or a couple hours before the game, and it's kind of like a roll up a character and see like what happens kind of deal. And
Mm-hmm.
some people do that for their games. Personally, I don't feel comfortable doing that because I'm going to be spending 3 to 6 hours with someone every week for like 1 to 2.5 years. I want to like them and I want to feel like they're contributing a lot to a story, especially if it's a story that 6 people are telling. Um, so what I usually do is I will respond to their message and ask them to tell me a little bit about their playstyle and what they're looking for in a game. I get a lot of wishy-washy responses of like, I'm a chameleon. I'm good for whatever. I just want to play. I've gotten a couple responses though that were red flags, and I've just blocked them or told them they're not a good fit. I had one person tell me that they were decisive and they were not afraid to tell someone if their idea was stupid, and that was the main thing they were proud of as a player. And I didn't keep talking to them, but if they seem okay, I'll usually ask a couple follow-up questions if they're wishy-washy, and then I send them my lore document, which is a 30-plus page document of world info. And I like players who are like very into the story and the plot and the lore, and really want to entrench themselves in the world. So, and it's perfectly fine. Like I'm sure that feels overwhelming, and I usually preface it by saying just the first few pages are important because it has the homebrew information that I use for like rules. And sometimes they read it and sometimes they don't. And the few players I've let in to my long-term games tend to read it and like reference it or talk about it. Um, and so if that they don't ghost because of that, because a lot of people will just not respond if I send them like homework to do beforehand. But if they do, then we'll do an interview. If the interview seems like it's going well, and other players who are in the game are invited to the interview too, kind of as a vibe check. And sometimes they'll log on, sometimes they won't. John plays in all of my games as a player, and he almost always logs on for these. And he's great because he asks a lot of questions that I would be more hesitant to ask. Um, and actually, a lot of the questions that you've asked, I've turned into like long-term questions that I just ask people, like about conflict and stuff, because I do think that the answers are very telling that people give. But if it seems like things are going well, the interview turns into a session 0, and then I wait until they send me a backstory and a character sheet and approve it, and then I add them to the game. And it's usually a 1 to 2 week process.
Yeah. I mean, I joined all of your campaigns because you're a great DM. I don't think I'd want to do a podcast with someone who sucks as a DM. You were talking about that
Well,
one
you're a
guy
great
who's like
player.
a red flag, and I'm like, interesting. That is absolutely someone I'd give a chance because we
Nope.
have very different values. I think it goes back to a little bit to what we were talking about before. See, this is also everything. We sometimes get back onto the main quest just for like a tiny bit before we hop back off. It's just, it's kind of here and
Rabbit
there.
holes are all connected.
Yeah, everything's interwoven. That's how it all works. Um, but yeah, like I either love it or I don't care about it, or like I'm very passionate about it or I don't care about it. And for me, it's like my players are the same thing. Like there's no players I'm kind of like, yeah, they're pretty nice, pretty cool. Like I'm like, no, I either need to love you and you're in the campaign, or you're not in the campaign. And if I hate you, absolutely not. You're blocked.
I would love to love all of my players. I would much prefer to just run a table that has just a lot of people who feel like they can be a safe space. I think maybe more flavorful personalities are more fun to watch, but I really don't want my players to ever feel uncomfortable or like they can't voice something. And I think having like a positive, sweet, friendly atmosphere, um, like I'd much rather lean more towards wholesome than edgy, personally. And that's just player preference and DM preference on my part. And I know you're a little bit more of a chaos monkey.
Yeah, my players are all also like little chaos gremlins. Like they'll, oh god, it's one of the things that like drives me nuts about them. They'll be like, they'll tell me in our post game chat, which is another thing that you've lifted from me. Um, like having to talk about the session after the camp or after the session, and also just like getting a vibe check, see what people want to do for next
Mm-hmm.
session, so you kind of know what to prepare for. Um, you've like stolen my interview questions, like you son of a bitch. I'm glad. I don't know. It's very flattering. I appreciate it. Um, but yeah, the like my players, I that's like one of the things like I am discriminatory about. Like if you're not a very accepting person, like you're not really welcome. Um, which isn't to say that like I don't mind conflict. Like that's part of like the fun of D&D is like that inner party like conflict. As long as like we are able to like separate like, hey, my character's not happy with you, and like, oh no, we're good. Like I love that my players are all like really down for that. Because like it adds like drama and like interesting things and like pretty realistic things. Like God, like half the country don't disagree with each other. Like and like a good probably shouldn't get into politics. Editor, scratch that one. Uh, we don't have an editor. Um, but yeah, like my my party is like we have a non-binary person. We have, I guess, including myself, a couple of people of color. Um, we have one woman, and yeah, I run parties of 5. Speaking of which, what's your ideal number for parties?
Definitely 5.
I know, right?
Um,
It's like a sweet number. It's like the
it's a
perfect
great
number.
number. I think it really depends on the players because if you have quieter players, I think you can stretch it to 6 and it doesn't feel too full. But if you have a lot of personalities, it's gonna feel like a lot. I In the Thursday game that I run, I have one player who is almost always very, very quiet during session, and one player who is active in midweek RP, like text RP, but is like quieter. So the other characters can have more personality, and for that game, I feel like having a guest star player for a few weeks might be fine, especially if there wasn't anything really important going on with backstory. But I think to get 6 players to work really, really well, everybody needs to be really good about not interrupting or talking over each other and giving each other shared spotlight. Whereas if you have 5, I think it's a lot easier to orchestrate naturally for people who aren't already very good at that. I think the other way it works is just if like at least half of your players are just very, very quiet and prefer to watch, as opposed to RP. But it's tricky. I don't think it's like guaranteed to work. Whereas 5, I feel like I can manage as a DM regardless of the variety of player I'm getting. I think 4 is manageable. Sometimes it can feel. I wouldn't say it feels quiet even. Like I think 4 is perfectly fine. It's just like 5 feels like at capacity, and 4 feels like there's a little extra room for people to get special attention, which is perfectly fine. 3, I've found, can be very fun if everybody is very focused on RP and very active, but you cannot do 3 if you have quiet players.
Well, I mean, one of your campaigns for a long while it was just 2 players, and
That's true.
I
I did
very much
just
enjoyed
have
it.
There was John and one other player who asked for like a campaign with specific characters from a one shot I'd run, and I really loved that group, and so I was very excited for it. And we had another player join recently who like kind of fits that wholesome vibe. So that's been really
I love it.
fun. But you and the other player talk a lot. Like you are the 2 main RP people in the campaigns that I run. So I think like you need to have people who are really actively engaged in the story for it to feel like a full campaign. Um, and I think if you're trying to make a living part time off of it, you know just financially don't want to run a game that small in general, unless you really really like the players.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it kind of puts me on that same line of thinking of like introducing new players. Because that's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and like how to effectively integrate someone into the campaign, especially if it's like a long running campaign, like session zero stuff, like from very beginning, or even like up to like 4 or 5 sessions in. Super
Hmm.
easy. It's not a big deal. Whatever. Like everyone's still kind of getting to know each other. When you're coming into a long established group, and like there's a lot of like drama, and there's a lot of like reasons to be secret because well, players often get into shenanigans and they piss people
Yep.
off, or like
Yep.
for whatever reason, and they have their secrets to keep. Like how to like effectively run that and like get them to come in together, and like where that balance is to be struck between having like, oh, this is what my character would do, versus like, hey, this is like we're all. I was gonna say adults, but like you don't have to necessarily be an adult to play D&D.
Right. Apparently, you're a child.
Yeah, like I said, that's why I had to stop myself because I'm a child. Uh, yeah, and like having that like player buy-in, like, hey, like chill out, like don't go too hard. Like this is someone who's joining the group. Like at the end of the day, for me, it's about like the player, like narrative stuff, character stuff, super important, but also like we're all like we all have our own lives. Like this is something we all buy into for 3 to 12 hours, depending on how crazy you are, a week to like commit to something that we all love and enjoy. And if it's, gonna be like, oh God, I gotta like fight and like defend myself at every turn, everything I fucking do because these people don't trust me, like that feels pretty bad.
Yes, but I think if people seamlessly, instantly accept you, it can feel a little cheap if you are very involved in the story and if the characters are normally being very secretive. So I think it helps to have story reasons. So personally, as a DM, I like to find an NPC, not necessarily a super important NPC, but one that's significant enough that the players either know them or trust them or have a reason to involve this person plot wise. So it's not just like, oh, hey, this person would like to come along. Um, in order to just kind of expedite that.
Right. There should always be a hook. I guess like I'm just like asking like where do you find that balance to be struck? Like, because there's got to be a balance. Like, this is someone who like there's no reason
Right.
for us to just like trust anyone coming into the group at this point, but we will and we do. Like,
Mhm.
how hard do you find that line to draw?
I mean, I think it depends a lot on the player, right? So a lot of that is something that you can figure out during your interview. One question that I've been asking lately that I think is helpful is how much plot armor do you feel like you want? And how okay are you, with like character death and stuff? Because even if most people are going to say they don't want plot armor, but not everyone means it. And I think based on like the hesitancy of their answer or how involved they are, in their character can give you some sort of idea. But that and like sometimes you can ask questions, like how do you approach conflict, and if they say I'm very conflict avoidant, you know that like okay, maybe we should go easy on this person. This is the sort of person, you need to be overtly nice to. Not that they can't handle it, but that their experience is probably going to be more enjoyable as a player, and I agree, like the player is more important than the character. Whereas, if they're like, I like to approach people directly, please kill my character. I get involved in backstory, but like, I want this to be real. Like, if you get that sort of player that feels very direct, you can get the sense that, like, okay, well, like, there can be some pushback here. And as a DM, you can orchestrate that to some degree, partially by giving them enough ins that, like, they'll integrate more seamlessly, and partially by just, like, as a DM, I do think it's appropriate to call out if the players are being too harsh because it's hard to tell when things are appropriate and when things aren't. I like to PM my players and ask them if they're okay with things, if there is any conflict in game, just to get an idea of like, as a person, are you okay with this? And 99% of the time, the players are fine with it. But I think it is really good to check and kind of based on vibe, kind of orchestrate that integration in a way that feels curated to the personality you're bringing onto the table.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that like is going to become like abundantly apparent as we do more of these episodes. But there's like no like one right way to do D&D, either whether it be like DMing or as a player, because we are very different people and we run very different campaigns. I am very much of the mindset of like this is the game. What happens happens. Like the dice fall as they will. I understand like to some degree like plot armor. It doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, my character can't die. It could also be like, I don't want my character to be like horrifically disfigured, even if they like had it coming, or like if they like the way the character looks, or like some aspects of her personality. Like, don't do that. Like, I totally get that.
I absolutely think that like any permanent changes to character build and appearance, since that's the only thing as a player you get to control, you absolutely need player permission before you do that.
Yeah. I guess like for me, my it's not like an explicit conversation I have with my party, but it is
Hmm.
something that like they like, because we're I DM for friends. Like, they may have been friends that I made on the internet, but they're still my friends, and like we know each other pretty well. And I get the feeling that like if I were to do something, like I would know beforehand whether like before I even like executed, like, yeah, this is absolutely something to be okay with. Like, we're all kind of like cut from the same cloth in that way. Like, yeah, there should be consequences for your actions. Whatever happens, happens. Um, but then, you know, you don't have that same luxury of like, all right, let me like establish years of a relationship with someone before you like, get heavily into a campaign. Like, you're kind of like doing it on the fly. Uh,
Hmm.
so definitely get that. I will say, my favorite like shows and books and like games, like there's always like consequences for your actions. Like, that's like the
Oh, I
main
know.
thing I love. Um, like, I love The Last of Us. I love Game of Thrones for a while. Like, it's like all about like, yeah, like, you may love these characters, but like, hey, you've done some things, and there's always gonna be some sort of reaction to whatever you've done. Um,
What
because,
is the harshest reaction you've ever, like, not reaction, repercussion you've ever given a player, and how did they react to it?
oh wow, I do feel really guilty about it, because like it's one of those things where like I am my players are like wicked smart.
Hmm.
Uh, like they oftentimes like circumvent or just like completely just like roll through an encounter because like they know what they're getting into, and like they'll plan beforehand, or like they'll just think of something on the fly, and it's just like a very creative way to approach an encounter, or like some sort of like negotiation, or like or something. And I like heavily like overestimated them, and it was a little bit more. I killed a character. I felt really bad about it. He was pretty upset, but he like accepted. He was like upset, and he like immediately, like, I was playing the game on Tabletop Simulator, and there's like a little like trash can, and like once you put the thing in the trash can, it's gone forever. And I had like this little arc, like, in place for them to like have like recover their soul, and he threw his character sheet away. I'm like, oh my god, oh god, no.
That's how
um
you know you've been perma-killed.
yeah, when you do it to yourself, like he just did it before I got to I got to message him. But it I think that in the end, like, it all worked out for the best. Like, he was upset, but like he was like, you know yeah, they had gone into like an ambush, and it was one of those things where it's like they could have gone into like one of the buildings along the side, or like, you know uh the theme of my campaign is like, what do normal people do when they get superpowers, and one of the characters is like super strong, so like even more busted than they usually are in D&D. Like, you could have like flipped the cart over and like use it as cover from the crossbowmen on the rooftops. But no, they just stood out in the open in this alleyway and just like took it. And I I was like, I was not expecting you guys to just try to try to YOLO it, but you know,
With
sometimes it happens. Yeah.
It goes to say, so there are always some encounters as a DM that you don't expect players to meet head on. Not every, at least in my opinion, my DM experience, not every encounter should be one that the players expect to conquer with brute force.
Mhm.
How much warning do you think is appropriate as a DM? Like, there's always the "Are you sure?" kind of trope from DMs, but how much warning do you, as a DM, think someone should give their players if they're walking into something as if they can just brute force it that clearly is not meant to be brute forced?
Um, so for me, I give you one. You get one. And even that I feel like is being gracious. Because like I said, like all my players are wicked smart. Um,
Hmm.
and it's like, yeah, like you should have like an idea of like consequences. And the way that I go about it is usually like, okay, so let me get straight. You guys want to, you know, go into this bar, kill a bartender, pretend to be them, and ambush like the corrupt cop that comes uh, in about an hour, and it's like 2 in the afternoon. So it's not like super busy, but there's a couple people still in there. That's what you want to do like right now, and then most of the times, like me, it's like saying back, like, well, when you put it like that, like, no, I don't want to do that. Most of the times that is the case, but I have
Okay.
had like some instances where we're like, yes, and like, okay, and then we start rolling dice, and then things fall where they fall.
Right. And when you say you get one, it sounds like when they come up with a crazy idea, you get one warning, as opposed to you get one warning per player for doing something crazy.
Um, most of the times, it's usually like one player has a crazy idea that they're like, you know how there's like that trope, never split the party.
Yeah, you guys split the party all the time.
Yeah. Well, I have one player in specific who splits off from a party by themselves. This is a player who's also died. I've had three players die in a campaign.
Right. Clarify, this isn't permadeath, correct? You're talking about
I had one
the wall
permadeath, and
phaser?
then I guess one person died
Yeah, the
two or
other
three
ones were
times.
temporary.
Yeah.
Okay.
One person died two or three times. One person died once, and one person perma died once. One other person. So like, yeah, it's a.
Mhm.
I listen. I have a group and I love them. Okay, don't you guys dare judge them.
I'm not
Um,
saying anything.
yeah, but they. So usually I'm just giving a warning to like one person because they're going like, okay, so let me get this straight. You want to split off on your own in this haunted forest and climb into a tree where there's a skeleton wearing this very like ominous mask, and you want to put the mask on. Like, I want to get this 100% clear. You're gonna climb up into this tree about 30 feet up in the air by yourself. Your party doesn't know where you are, and you want to sit in their seat and put the mask on. And they said yes. So I
For
was
that
like,
as well.
okay. The worst part is this particular player always calls out exactly what's going to happen, and they do it anyways. And I'm like, I love you.
Right? It's like taking the failure is more fun than success to an extreme.
It certainly makes it interesting. It certainly makes it interesting. Um,
Right. And I think if you have a party that's especially cautious, sometimes players like that can be really refreshing. And it just kind of depends to the degree that they do that and to the degree that the party needs to be pushed from their inertia.
yeah, I think that like that's another thing to think about too. Like, so when you think about like party composition and like balance, like what is like your first go to? Are you thinking about like mechanically? Are you thinking about personalities? Like where do you go for that?
I never think mechanically. Be a party of all fighters. Be a party of all wizards or rogues. Like, I don't particularly care about balancing things mechanically because I'll always like find a way to make the plot interesting, to make your characters need to be useful. Like, there's so many different flavors of subclass. Like, I think as long as players are smart and they think about things in a smart way, you can circumvent most of your shortcomings if you're not balanced out mechanically. And I think one thing that we have in common is that we both prefer really smart players. like I freaking love my smart players. Except I think you veer more towards intelligent chaos, and I veer more towards intelligent wholesome. But I think we both can really appreciate players who think through things. Personally, I put a lot of Easter eggs in my homebrew stuff, and it's so exciting as a DM, like that I have like players who catch that and put things together. And it doesn't mean that you can't figure out the plot without it, but it definitely like makes things more fun, and it shows like how things are connected when you do pick up on it, and it makes things for me a lot more fun. Um, so I think personality just is so much more important than anything mechanical, at least in my opinion, because I feel like I can navigate around a difficult personality and I can navigate around a difficult character mechanical build, but it's going to be so much more fun if the personality is not the issue and it's just a mechanical issue. Like that's like solving a puzzle as opposed to being HR. And as a DM, I'd much prefer to do puzzles and world building and story stuff than HR stuff.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Like I said, like I hyper filter before we even get to like character creation process. Like, hey, am I gonna like you as a person? Uh,
Right. So, sorry, I went over my screening process. Can you go over yours and just maybe we can talk about the differences between them a little bit?
yeah, sure. I mean, you've witnessed a lot of like mine because I've been joining in on your like interview sessions.
Right. You jump in with all the questions.
Yeah, like I've got a million questions. That's the thing. So, uh, by and large, most of my players have come from uh, Reddit, and
Which is
it's
wild. Like
it's a
the kind of
slog.
crowd you must get for a free game on Reddit.
It's
Oh
a
boy,
slog,
dude.
especially like because a lot of people have like these hyper optimized like, oh, I could be super OP if I get to this level. I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, we're level 14, so uh, you know, it is pretty daunting, and it's just like hard to like filter through the personalities that come through. Because God, a lot of these people like are, I don't want to be like too disparaging, but my goodness, like they they just seem like to be pretty selfish people. They just like it's all about me, me, me kind of deals. It's like I want to be the OP one. I want to be the hero of a story. I want to have a spotlight all the time. I want to be this. I want to be good at everything.
And I think to some degree, like playing D&D is living out a fantasy, and everyone has a very specific fantasy they want to live out. And I think you should be able to do that as a player. Like that's part of the fun and the appeal of D&D. But what do you think is like the right balance to strike? Like as a player coming in with something that you're really excited about versus being a good player to the rest of the group and to the DM.
I think the most important thing to keep in mind is 100% that you need to remember that this is cooperative storytelling. Like we are all working together. It's not just about you, it's about us. Um if a DM
Yeah.
is not necessarily the bad guy, the DM is also like your allies and, you know, the shopkeeps and like the people who need help. They're not necessarily just the big bad evil guy. And I know that a
Hmm.
lot of parties like get that conflated and it's like, okay, we got to work against the DM and like conspire. And it's like, I'm
Right.
always rooting for my players. Even when I'm killing you, I am on your side. And like, I don't want to do it, but I kind of have to do it.
Oh my God.
Otherwise, like,
I
it is.
feel so bad for messing with my players and beating them. I would love for them to succeed. I've killed one
Yeah.
player twice and I feel really bad about it. But I also think they were given a lot of warning. But I would
The
have loved them to not die.
I know exactly what you're talking about, who you're talking about. And yeah, it's I didn't say it in game or anything, or like even to the party,
Oh,
but I
I
was
know
just
you have
like,
not.
I was like, man, this is exactly what I've been warning about. Like, hey, we need to like come up with some sort of countermeasure for like this particular area, this thing that this place like specializes in, and this particular player was like, it'll be fine, let's just go. I'm like, and so of course, like, you know, I had made plans to like try to go, you know, find some way to circumvent it. But I think I missed that session, or I came in late and they had already left and was like, okay, we're full sending it. But yeah, no, I get it because it always feels
Yeah.
bad to like kill the same player in a row.
Yeah. He's been very gracious about it. And to be clear, this is not a permadeath. This is a
Right.
revivify situation. And fortunately, their cleric is very generous and spent a lot of money on diamonds. Um,
Yes.
I I do think that Yeah, it's a delicate balance because you don't want to treat your players like they're stupid and hand them everything. You want them to feel like, oh, like I think some of the most rewarding things as a player is if I think of something and I think of what we might be encountering and I think of what might be useful and I come up with my own solution for it or I seek out a solution for it or if I notice something and be like, oh, we might encounter something like that, this is important. And I take that initiative, it feels so much more rewarding to have that payoff later on to be like, oh, yes, you did think about this. You did, like plan ahead. You do have something to circumvent that. And because of that, you get a lot of personal fulfillment because it makes you feel smart. It makes you feel important and powerful. Whereas if the DM has an NPC that hands you something and says, here, you'll need this,
Yeah,
thinking to use it in the moment is not anywhere near as satisfying. And you want those big satisfying moments for players, so you don't want to hand them things, you don't want to railroad them. You want them to feel like the solutions to things are things that they came up with and they thought of, because you want the game to feel rewarding.
yeah. It's like one of the issues that I am like still like grappling with. Like my players are obscenely rich. My players are pretty like enterprising and entrepreneurial. And when the question was asked, like, okay, you like what do normal people do when they gain superpowers? They go get fucking rich, is what they do. Um, it's like the scene in the original Spider-Man where Tobey Maguire like needs money,
We're
so he
doing
goes to a
like
wrestling
wrestling
match.
matches.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh, they placed obscene bets on themselves, and it's like, yeah, we this is a wrap. This is a lockup because we have superpowers, you guys don't, and they just stomped it. And it's like, yeah, like this was a good idea. Like, I'm not gonna take this away from you guys. You guys are obscenely rich. And it is like a bit of an issue of like, okay, like what is like worthwhile for your gold now? Like, it's not a question of like, uh, can you afford it? It's a question of like, is the thing even available? And like, can you just not hire someone to like make the thing for you? It's like, yeah, you guys can absolutely have like a fucking, keep and a ship and uh access to like uh very important people who would need money for whatever reasons, whether to like pay the wages of an army, or yeah, it's a lot to balance, especially because like I know that in my economy I use a silver standard and it's base 100, so it's like 100
Can you
copper to a
explain what that
silver.
means? Oh, okay,
So
yeah.
yeah, 100 copper to a silver, and like a silver's worth like $1. So coppers are like the cents, silver is like $1, and then go up from there. Uh, yeah, they're stupid fuck you rich. They're actually stupid fuck you rich. Um, yeah, no, I not gonna lie. We went on like several side quests and ended up somewhere so far. I don't remember what even like the second side quest was. I know you asked me a question. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, I'm also forgetting it. We'll come back to it at some point.
Yeah, at some
If
point, maybe
not,
there's
if
something.
not this week, then next week.
Yeah. Um,
Right. I think we do have like 5 minutes left. Is there like a subject we want to wrap up with? I know we were talking about maybe discussing hooks this episode.
oh,
Um,
that's right. I guess
I
we
don't
did.
know.
What was it? Rabbit holes and hooks.
Yeah, well,
Whoopsies.
maybe we should start naming things after the fact as opposed to beforehand. I thought it would give us some sort of structure, but clearly it has not helped.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I guess like
so
that's we kind of touched on it before, like integrating like a new player into a campaign,
mhm.
and in that same vein, like giving your players hooks. I guess like how do you go about it? Is the best way we could just like start, right? Just like start talking, end up wherever we end up.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the player, and I found that if a new player joins, because they're paying, and sometimes they're in multiple games or they're trying out games, or you're trying to figure out, if that personality is really going to mesh with the existing ones, or if they want the sort of story that you're telling. That sometimes they'll start for a little while, even if they put a lot of effort in, and then they'll drop. But I found that if a player is going to drop from a long-term campaign, they typically will drop within the first 6 sessions. So what I usually do is I'll give them a very loose story hook, that will bring them into the campaign. Like I know this NPC or something like that, but keep the connection very hesitant. But make it enough so that the players need them for something. So like something that's immediately present, like a short-term hook. And then if they put something in their backstory that is ambiguous, I will wait to feed them information on it until after I feel like they've become a fit with the campaign, because I've had instances in the past where I've put a lot of story hooks and plot hooks or plot points in a character, and then either the character is left or the player has left, and you're kind of stuck scrabbling for something that isn't going to be a super fulfilling arc because that player is no longer present or that character is no longer present. So I found that you want to have things that stay fairly open, and then you're able to fill in and flesh in later. Or if they have like an open hook, you can have plans where like maybe next arc that these things are going to come into play, and you can start laying groundwork for it, or giving PCs the name of other NPCs in the new player's backstory. And they're generally tertiary or something that doesn't need to get looked into or won't come to light until later on. And so plant those seeds, but don't actually let them sprout until like a month and a half, 2 months in. And then the more entrenched the player is in the story and the more long term they seem, the more you can kind of build things up for them. And I think it should be like a growing process that continues to build as the player becomes more entrenched in the world and in the plot.
Yeah, I do something very similar, where I'll have them like write up a backstory, and it may not come up for a while, it might come up for a long while, but it is
Right.
something that like I will keep in mind and like kind of like sprinkle in here and there, just like to allude to it. But it's not something that's going to be like, okay, shit, something pertinent is going to happen. Like, oh, you mentioned that you have like a family debt, and like you're working to pay it off. Like, okay, your family may not be kidnapped until like 4 months in, and you may not find out until like 7 months in. Sometimes it just be like that.
Right.
Um, but yeah, no, for the most part, like I don't have as like long of a waiting period to start sprinkling things in as you, because I hyper filter before we even get to like the interview stage. Like we're messaging back and forth before we even have like a real time discussion with one another. So by the time like you even make it into the group, I'm like, okay, I like you enough as a person. Like I'm down to put in the work and effort, and time to, you know, be like having like pretty lengthy conversations, like one on one. Like I don't know if you do this, but I'll call up my players just like on a whim. I'll like be driving to work or something. Like, hey, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your backstory and like some things that are going on, and here are some things that you would know, and here are some like hooks and like some things that like would be important to you and that's pertinent to you and your character would know about. And just wanted to make sure that you were aware of it, and like just like actually like literally have like hours long conversations with my players, um, about their backstory and about like what's going on in the campaign and what's important to them, and like just ask questions too. A lot of times, like I don't require like a super involved like backstory to be written. But what usually happens, like it's usually kind of like this, like okay, tell me about your character. Do they have family? Just like start bare basics. Like, do they have family that's alive? Do they have a spouse? Do they have kids? Like, tell me more. And then like, all right, is there anyone that who would like hate them? Is there anyone who has like a rivalry with them? Like, kind of like develop them there. Like, I'll ask them more about that particular NPC and it'll be fleshed out. And it's not something that, like they necessarily have uh, notes about, or I have notes about, but it's just a conversation we had, and I just like bank on me having a good enough memory to just remember stuff, and it's by and large just worked out for the best. So it just works.
I do a much shorter version of that via text. I prefer to have a record of everything because I take pretty meticulous notes, and I have a doc with everyone's backstory and the places that the backstories overlap. And it's very important to me to make sure that all the facts are consistent because I tend to drop a lot of things. So I want to make sure that if, like, me inserting a name in a certain place uh, is something that a player is going to pick up on and they notice that there's a relation or they notice that something is different, I want to make sure as much as possible that that is deliberate because I love
Yep.
rewarding players and seeing players pick up on that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure that I have my lore as straight as possible so that I can leave clues like that.
Yeah. I have I'll have like not like detailed notes, but I have like in Tabletop Simulator, there's these like little note cards that you can make, and I'll have little
Mm-hmm.
bags to organize these note cards in. So I have bags for each individual character. Like, okay, these are names of like NPCs that are important. These are like places. There's a note card specific for them to like give me like a short synopsis about them. Um, and like I also have bags for locations as well. But Tabletop Simulator is jank as fuck, and I have since needed to drop it because there have been occasions where I'll come in and like the table's just like gone, and so like all the pieces and like character sheets and note cards and like all that stuff's just like falling through the floor and like respawning like back above the table and just falling through, and it's just raining note cards and like
Yeah.
character tokens, and it was like, oh my god, if any of my players were
Then
as slow, we could just grab a note card and they could just like find out things that I haven't playing. I'm like, no, I'm not like this. So I need to switch platforms 100%.
yeah, I mean, I can't necessarily recommend mine. I keep everything in this notebook and a series of like 30 different Google Docs. So,
Yeah,
um,
like these are just like a couple of my notebooks for like several different campaigns. I have a couple more back there, but I just keep like hand notes because it's nice to have like physical notes and also not something that's in a program that is jank as shit. Um, yeah, the how do you go about things when like you have like a hook? Because I know we've talked about this personally, but like I just wanted to have for the record stated on the record. Um, when there is like an NPC or like an important story hook that you were banking your players to take to bite on, but they didn't.
the story changes. I mean, this
Mhm.
happened in like, I mean, the Thursday game that you play in.
Yep.
Towards the beginning of the campaign, the very first arc, this very wealthy patron sent the players on a quest to retrieve this artifact. And she was going to pay them a huge amount of money. Like the deal was pretty good. I was banking on her being a key NPC for the rest of the campaign, but the players found the artifact and then fled, stole a boat, and faked their own death. So that changed things a lot. And so a lot of the information that she had that the players were going to receive, they didn't end up getting, which I think has made the story more interesting. Or they've gotten it from other places or in a different order, which honestly, like, I think you can't run a railroad campaign and force your players to do something. You need to know events that are going to happen at certain times, and you need to know what your NPC's goals are and how quickly they're going to accomplish them. And then you need to let the players run into them and see what happens. And loosely have like a couple MacGuffins or things that they need spaced throughout. Um, you shouldn't have a set way that the players need to approach things or else they fail. But I
Yes, I
think
agree.
as
100% I
opposed to
agree.
full sandbox, you need to have, like generally things planned out as they get to a certain place. And there's, metagame wise, it's kind of understood that, the DM is giving you a lot of NPCs, they're giving you a lot of situations. You pick a couple and you pursue them, and that becomes the story. And the way they pursue them is up to the players, and it's up to the DM how many options they want to give the players, and up to the players how many options they want to create themselves. And as a DM, you just need to be open to it.
Okay. This leads into like another question that I have. If you had to put a number to it, what is your like split between improv and prepared work?
I think it really depends on the situation. There are certain scenes or certain things that I will plan for. For
Sure.
example,
But how
there was
often
a
does that occur?
talk.
Right? Like I guess like that's what I'm getting at. Like how often does that really occur where like you have like certain scenes?
Yeah, not often. There was a character that had amnesia, and I had like a 6-page story that she was going to remember in like sporadic paragraphs when certain things were triggered or when she encountered things. And so that's, a lot of prep work that I did for that character. But it was at the very beginning when she was first starting, and that was the bulk of her discovering her backstory. I had a character put a lot of effort into a relationship, and then I wrote out a proposal and a date for her to be taken on. So I think there needs to be a lot of effort put in certain key places for it to feel worthwhile. Usually, when characters get to a city, I put in maybe 6 or 7 hours of prep work into all the NPCs that are there. I make a custom map. I figure out what all the stories are going to be. And then while they're there, and it usually takes them 2 to 3 months minimum to leave a town and like finish up story stuff that's happening, I do very little prep work. Sometimes I'll have a few things available based on what I know they're going to do, or I'll have a battle map made. But generally, it's like a lot of prep work before each arc, and then while the arc is going, keep it chiefly improv with a little bit of prep stuff thrown in between based on what I think they're going to do.
Um Even so, like I would say that that is a lot of prep work. Like even like establishing like the shops and like the locations. Like I know there was one thing like I want to like highlight it too. Like I think it's super impressive. and super like very generous and kind of you to do so. But I know what you do, like custom maps that you draw up yourself. I know what you do, like custom art for your players if they make it past that introductory period of like 6 weeks. Um, yeah, I think it's really impressive, and it's like, yeah, I remember we were playing together in a campaign. Like you would do this like thing where like you would sketch out a scene of something that happened that session. It was super cool, super impressive. I was like, yo,
Oh, thank you.
this is awesome. Like I just couldn't like wrap my head around like, when did you have the time to do this? We were role playing all session. We were like, we were in combat. I mean, I guess maybe it was like during combat, but yeah.
It was definitely during combat.
No, yeah. Like you put so much work into your world and your campaigns and your sessions, that it's like, I do think that you're underplaying like, you know, how admirable that is, because I know that I certainly don't do that. Like I'm certainly not drawing from my players. Like, hey, the power of imagination is kind of how I roll.
That's fair. As an illustrator, I think visuals are very important to me. That's why I put a lot of like inspo images up on Roll20 as opposed to just battle maps and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Um,
you've given me so much crap about like other people like care so much about how their character looks, and you've given me like a line. I'm like, I don't care how I look. I've always
it's
imagined it
true.
as like, oh God, I
Well,
really want to know about this now. Like when you are like imagining in your head, like, you know, you're playing D&D or you're like DMing or whatever, like what perspective are you viewing this from? Because for me, I'm like, when I'm a player, it is first person all the time. Like I'm not like viewing it as like a scene in a movie.
absolutely seen in a movie for me, third person.
Wow. Okay, so you know exactly how you look. You like you know what you wore that day. Like,
The in any video game, outfit and character creation is the most fun part.
yeah, you've given me a lot of crap about
Oh my
how
god.
I get through like character creation in
It
like,
it physically hurts me that you just hit accept.
I mean, not all the time. Like I'll try for a little bit. I mean, I'm like, I just want to hear a story. Like I
But
don't know.
don't you want to figure out what percentage of freckles your character has?
I have freckles. Yeah.
Right. To clarify, I was just giving him a hard time about what his character looked like because I was trying to do his character art and I was asking things like, "What color are their eyes? What is their face shape?" And his response was, "I don't know," which is difficult when you're trying to do art for someone.
It was very sweet.
But
I acknowledge I'm
yeah, we
very
got
difficult.
there. I've learned that John literally does not care, so I've started just picking things, which
I
has
want you to
worked out
pick things.
nicely.
Like, yeah, I think that's actually more interesting. Like, you know, what is your opinion or like your perception of like my character? Like, how does that look in your head? Because like in my head, I'm like, it's just me, but I'm a homeless guy. Like like,
No,
that's
I think
it.
that's really unique and interesting. I definitely am used to clients saying that they want me to show them things, but what they mean is we want you to draw things a million times and then pick the one we like, as opposed to we want to give you an idea of what we want, because we don't know what we want. Um, and in my experience, clients who say that they don't care are either the worst or the best, because they either when they say they don't care, what they mean is I care very much, but I don't know what I want, and I want you to figure that out for me, or they really don't care and they're fine with it, and it's one or the other. And oh gosh, I don't want to, like spend all this time doing art for someone that is going to be like, well, this isn't what they look like, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
but
but you're definitely
that's not
the
really as
the
interesting to
latter
me.
type of client.
Like the interesting thing to me is always like the personality and like the character itself, like the actual character, your character. And for me, like the way that I want to engage is like with the story, with like talking to NPCs, always talking to NPCs. Um, and like what kind of like when I make a character, I pick like one aspect of my personality and like I hyper exaggerate it and I lean into it. Um,
Hmm.
Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but it's always at least interesting and like fun.
Which is really fun. I think talking about the percentage of yourself that you bring to your character is a really fun topic, and it is something we can spend a lot of time talking on. I think we should pick up next session with this because I think it has been about an hour at this point.
Fine. Okay. I guess we can end the party, you party pooper.
Thank you so much to anyone who's listened. I'm Maria. This is John, and we are just a side quest.
All right. Bye. I love you all.
Bye.